Welcome back to Wardrobe Wednesdays, where we take you into the costume collection of the Confused Greenies of Players Patchwork Theater Company. Over the years, we've had to have several costumes commissioned specifically for needs, especially when it comes to very specific Commedia dell'arte costumes. But most of our collection was required sort of ad hoc, you could say even in a patchwork style. We would find things in thrift stores, we would get things off of eBay, donated from private collections, personal costumes and garbs that were loaned to the troupe. But we also would occasionally find the gold mine of a theater having a costume sale, old costumes from productions. And those could be great, because one problem that we often had in the early days of the troupe is we didn't have any kind of uniform costumes. If we wanted to have characters dressed the same or similar, say the Zani Watch, the city guard that we had, we didn't have costumes for them. We didn't have a uniform. We just put them in whatever sort of military-looking uniforms that we could find. It was often rather difficult when at a thrift store to find something that matched, to find 2, 3, or even more items of the same, that looked enough like the same thing. It was February 2011. A snowstorm had hit the night before, almost derailed a show that we had that night, but we did still go on. The next day, the city streets, they were still slushy, there was ice, it was bad, but we weren't going to miss a costume sale. Because we drove downtown because the Great Lakes Theater Festival, part of Playhouse Square, was having a massive costume sale. We got there, we got a little stuck trying to get out, but it was worth it. We found so many great items at that costume sale, and I'm sure we'll show you some of those in future episodes. But for today we would like you to see our vest. Maybe not see quite that much of our vest right now. Hold on. Alright, that's a bit better. One of the things that we found at that costume sale that was wonderful was a whole box full of these, well, we call them our military vests. I don't actually even know what production they were originally for, but it was a series. It was a series of just simple vests that had been created with different patches. Most of them were very much the same. This number 11, whatever that means. But a few of them definitely had some different style patches. Possibly different officers, different factions. They would have military ribbons. They would have other decorations on the lapels. They would have some other ribbons on them. What was the production? I don't know. I did wish I did, but there was, I actually don't remember how many. I could count the ones that we have here, but I'm not sure I found them all in our costume collection. It was well over a dozen. And we might not have even purchased them because we did not have an immediate need in the Confused Greenies for anything like this. But we had friends in another troupe who did. The Discworld Players is a performing arts group that we first met at Marcon. In fact, it was seeing them perform at Marcon that inspired us to definitely come to Marcon the following year with our own performance. So as the years went on, we shared actors, we shared costumes, we shared props. So by 2011, seeing a bunch of military vests when they were about to put on a production that included a bunch of soldiers seemed perfect. They were interested in borrowing them, it gave us an excuse to buy. We loaned them out, they saw their debut at Marcon that same year, long before they actually were using the Confused Greenies, but we would use them quite often. Except for classic Commedia dell'arte, which is set in the 16th century, and Victorian steampunk Harlequinade, which is set in the 19th century, we would use these outfits whenever we had some reason to have military or guards or a uniformed crew. We would often use these in parodies including Star Trek, Star Wars, anime, and more. One of the earliest times they were used in our troupe was at Marcon 2012. That was the first Marcon that got moved to Easter weekend, so we decided we were going to mark the occasion by doing a parody of our own called Doctor Who and the Easter Invasion. This was the introduction of Queen Delta, who herself was a parody of a parody from Doctor Who. We didn't anticipate that Delta would become as important in our various performances, and parodies should show up many times in our anime parodies going forward, but we used her for one specific reason, because Queen Delta was queen of the BunnyMen. Yes, this was an Easter show, and welcome to the reason why we're doing this Wardrobe Wednesday this week. Queen Delta became a stock character for us. She and often her BunnyMen would show up in various other productions. Originally meant to be our sci-fi parodies, but she shows up quite often in our anime parodies, especially when she's out against fan service. So she kind of butts heads with Team Henshin H quite often. So these vests became quite often known to be BunnyMen uniforms, which is convenient because bunny tails, they pop right into the back of these uniforms quite nicely, and you can store the extra bunny tails in the pockets. That does mean, though, if you're playing a character other than a BunnyMen and wearing this vest, check carefully to make sure that your costume doesn't actually have a little bunny tail. Queen Delta and the BunnyMen are paladins, out to enforce the justice, or at least how they see put. They are noble warriors, out to do good in the galaxy, sort of a self-defined police force. And yes, when we use them, they do, of course, wear bunny ears. To make sure that Queen Delta stands out from the BunnyMen, we put her in a very specialized hat, which we can show you now. How am I going to display the hat? Oh, right. We also have a random bag full of styrofoam heads. Another happy find from a theater's costume sale. So that Queen Delta can stand out against the rest of the BunnyMen, she has a specialized hat of her own. This was acquired by one of our own players of the Patchwork, Isa, when she was on the West Coast for a convention. She brought back the hat and a variety of cat ears and cat tails, which we still use very often in our anime parodies today. An interesting side note about the BunnyMen, we decided that because they're paladins, they shouldn't just have ray guns like we had our Star Wars and Star Trek parody characters have, so we gave them a bunch of the prop lightsabers that we had. This was before we were doing a lot more Star Wars parodies. So the BunnyMen basically have energy swords. And that meant that since we have an interconnected universe, that if we ever got around to doing our parody of the prequel trilogy of Star Wars, it was going to be Delta and the BunnyMen who trained the Jedi Knights in the ways of the farce. Another player of the Patchwork named Devin makes wonderful costumes, and at one point she was selling several of them, and one of the items we acquired was her rabbit costume, which, if I recall correctly, was for an Alice in Wonderland cosplay. It does come with a great set of bunny ears, but we've mostly used the pants. These awesome furry pants that have a great little furry tail too. Despite mimicking rabbit legs, they haven't actually been used on the BunnyMen or Delta. They've mostly been used when we've had a character who want to disguise themselves as some sort of monster or creature or some part animal human hybrid. I'm sure that we'll see them much more often in the future. And now you've seen our vests. We really have to thank the Great Lakes Theater Festival. We still don't know why they made these costumes. Chances are they were made for one run, but we are glad they kept them. We are glad they sold them together. We're glad that we found the box and we could buy all of them. They have been very important in the history of the troupe, and they'll be seen in many productions going forward. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Wardrobe Wednesdays, and now you know why the Confused Greenies have so many rabbits in the troupe. So, have a good week, everyone. Remember, Monday is Discount Chocolate Day, and we could probably all use some of that chocolate to get us through the next coming weeks. And laugh while you learn while you laugh.